Film on to America. I'm Russ Collins for YouTube, joined by Penny Dreadful and Patrick McCray. It's great to see you both. We're here to discuss He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. So, Danielle, what got you into He-Man? When? Why? How?
That's a good question. Well, getting some feedback from Eternia there. I I got into Masters of the Universe back in the 80s, and I was probably too old to get into Masters of the Universe at that point, because people always say, oh, are you an 80s kid or a 70s kid? And I straddle the line because I was born in the early 70s, so I remember a lot of things about the 70s and pop culture, and I was still a kid when I went into the 80s, but I was also a teenager in the 80s. Like, by the time the movie came out, the Masters of the Universe movie came out, I was a teenager by then. And I guess it was probably like I became aware of Masters of the Universe in '82 when it first came out, and I thought it looked cool. It was very like atmospheric, the commercials and stuff with a timpani drum and boom, 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 boom. And it had this very kind of, fantasy sword and sorcery kind of vibe to it, very colorful characters and stuff like that. But I first got into it, I guess it was '83, really, when got Faker was the first. I convinced my dad to buy me a Faker figure. It was the blue He-Man, the evil robot double.
Oh, yeah.
And I got into it for a couple of years there, and really got into the cartoon, the Filmation cartoon, and yeah, I kind of stopped collecting it probably around being into it around 80. I saw Secret of the Sword in the theater, and then maybe around 86 I kind of fell by the wayside with it. I remember when the movie came out, I didn't go see it. I refused to go see it. Because I picked up the magazine. It was the He-Man magazine, Masters of the Universe magazine in the store, and I picked it up and I said, that doesn't look like He-Man and Skeletor and Beastman and Evil Lyn. They didn't look anything like the characters in the cartoons or the toys. So I said, I'm not going to see that. And then I saw it later on like Superstation TBS in the 90s. I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. I don't know. I kind of dug it when I finally got to see it. It grew on me. And then I discovered the kind of the fandom in the 90s. I was like on a mailing list for a little while, Guardians of Grayskull mailing list, and then I kind of stepped away. I watched the 2002 cartoon, and then I kind of came back to it in, gosh, it must have been, I don't know, like around that time, around the 2002 cartoon, I came back to the fandom and I got involved with it, and gradually, eventually I ended up working on the Masters of the Universe brand for several years, for 4 or 5 years, freelance writing for the toy packaging bios and on the Dark Horse books and stuff like that. Like I wrote the bios for one of the characters in this movie, which is Karg. So they released a figure of him, and I did the bio for that character, and they did the comic magazine version. I did his bio too, and I pulled a lot of like gothic kind of. He has a kind of a interrogator kind of vibe to him. Like he has all these weird little tools hanging from his belt. So I made him sort of a.
That's living the dream. I really mean it. What a great assignment! What a great thing to get to do. To me, that's just marvelous. Didn't you do like one of the coffee table books or participate in one of those?
Yeah. I did several of those for Dark Horse, and this was one I spearheaded, was the newspaper strip books. Like much like Dark Shadows, Masters of the Universe did have a comic strip that ran for 4 years, and this was kind of a lost media thing. It was out there, but we had to really track it down and try to find all these old newspaper strips. So I wrote the forward to this, and we collected all the strips from all over the world. It was quite a quest to do that. And then another book I worked very heavily on were character guides, Masters of the Universe, like it's kind of an encyclopedia. And I'd love for Hermes. I want to pitch to Hermes Press, maybe do a Dark Shadows one. I think that would be pretty cool. An encyclopedia type book, So we did. And it was Val Staples at MV Creations, who he has a company. I became friends with him through the fandom, and he got a lot of like freelance gigs. And when the brand manager at Mattel left, who was doing the bios for the packages, toy packaging, he left, and Val secured the job and offered it to me and my co-writer Eric Marshall. We both did that together, and then he involved me in the books and stuff. He'd always kind of hire me to work on stuff, but these two books were the ones I worked on probably the most. But I did the mini comic book too, the interviews, and quite a few other things for a few years there. And now Mattel has kind of moved on with the new their new stuff, and they have new people, which I wish them well. They're all doing great stuff, and I had my chance to do something fun, and it was cool while it lasted. So.
Yeah.
If they did another live action movie, who would you cast as He-Man today?
I wish I had more familiarity with a lot of the actors out there. I think the obvious answer is Chris Hemsworth, but he's so identified with Thor that it's going to be, it's too close to the same characters. I'm trying to think, like, I don't know any other. Maybe the Rock has too much of an edge to him, I think, to be He-Man. He would be somebody else, maybe, another character. But I'm trying to think, like John Cena, is he still doing? I really don't know. It has to be somebody who has like a kindness to them. I think that's the thing with He-Man for me, is those Filmation cartoons. It always reminded me of like this Silver Age or Golden Age superheroes. Like he just so pure of heart and kind, and has a wry sense of humor and stuff. And it has to be somebody who's kind of charming, but is also pretty swole, I guess. I don't know.
Patrick?
I did you ever see Nightmare on Elm Street 3?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, a long time ago, yeah.
Dick Cavett a hell of an actor. A Yale trained, and he's still with us. I say Dick Cavett.
Why didn't I think of that? Cavett.
But you would go see it?
I would go see it. Is Bert Convy still around? He was almost Barnabas, so maybe he could be He-Man too. I don't know.
But now, Peter Marshall said that there were two truly evil men in Hollywood. They're just irredeemably evil. One was Dan Rowan. The other was Bert Convy. But he didn't go into. No, I'm not kidding. It's in his book, Backstage at Hollywood Squares, and he didn't go into any detail about it.
How do you drop a comment like that and not elaborate? Like, I wonder what he meant by that.
Tantalizingly.
Yes, right. Somebody has to write a Bert Convy is evil fanfic. Go.
Now, Jewel, now is the time when you tell us that Adam Driver would make a perfect Skeletor.
No. Frank Lane.
Adam Driver.
Listen, Frank Langella did a great Skeletor for the movie. Great. I mean, he knocked that out of the park. Now, if I were casting Skeletor, I would go Tobin Bell, not
Tobin Bell. What a great choice!
Because he's got the voice. Now here's my issue with this. He's a lot older than what Frank Langella was when Langella took the part, because he's in his 70s. But
I mean, Skeletor does not look like a spring chick.
Well, no, but there's a thing called stunt work too. But for He-Man, now he doesn't quite have the body, but you can work out. Last time I checked, Wyatt Russell, Kurt's son.
Oh, okay. But that sounds great. I love Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn. Is he Goldie Hawn's son as well as Kurt and Goldie's child?
I believe so.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, awesome.
But
I have to look into him. Yeah.
What's some of your favorite memories from working with the He-Man license, Penny?
I guess just meeting the different people that I got to meet, and to work with, like my friend Eric Marshall, who was on my podcast in the second episode to talk about, he got really into Dark Shadows too. He had seen a little bit over the years, but he loves all kinds of pop culture stuff, and he's brilliant. So the friendship I formed with Eric on co-writing the bios and bouncing ideas back and forth with each other and spitballing stuff and pulling from, we were like super geeky about pulling deep cut stuff from the media from all over the world. Like we were pulling from like Italian comics and Brazilian comics, in addition to like the prominent media, like the cartoons and the movie and things like that. So we were just having a lot of fun doing that. So I guess I think that in particular. And another thing I really had fun doing was, one thing in Masters of the Universe was always kind of a hodgepodge of all speculative fiction, like anything you can imagine. You have the sword and sorcery, science fiction, have fantasy, high fantasy, you have even weird Western, you have superhero fiction, and there was some horror in there too. There was Scareglow, the ghost, the evil ghost, Scareglow, and
Skeletor.
Skeletor.
I mean, he's a skull with muscles.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Skeletor, who's kind of a lich kind of a character, and then you had Larry DiTillio did the House of Shakoti Part 1 and 2 in the cartoon, which was totally Lovecraft inspired because DiTillio was a big Lovecraft fan. But one thing I wanted to do was bring a little more of the horror to Masters of the Universe when I was working on it. So one of the characters they released was a mummy, and it was a concept design from the 80s that was never made into a figure. So they named him Rap Trap. And so they made a Masters of the Universe mummy, and I got to write his bio, which I pulled stuff from the Karloff movie and the Karras films too, and kind of worked some of that in. I got to create a vampire character. I did a monster rally with all the monsters together, all the monster characters, and I said, well, you got to have a vampire to have a monster rally. So I created a character called the Crimson Countess, which I guess The Boys has a character called the Crimson Countess. So oops, but so that's the original. Artist for the card back. Masters of the Universe did a piece of art with Crimson Countess. This is a newer piece, but he did it in that style. So
the shield. I love
yeah. It's like, Masters of the Universe has that kind of, there is like that kind of corny or a little bit of a it's a kid line, and I love that inherent innocence of Masters of the Universe, so so I designed her with a shield. I mean, I can't draw, but the real artist drew her. She never got a figure, but worked her into the lore. And I had some fun with some of the horror elements in the brand and playing that up a little bit. So
I have to ask, when you're doing the book and you got the bios, did anyone suggest a scratch and sniff page for Stinkor?
I wish they had. That would have been amazing.
That's perfect.
That would have been amazing. Do you know what they used for Stinkor to make him smell?
Love.
Love, yes. Well, obviously, but
why? What they use?
Patchouli. Stinkor smells like hippies. Yeah, they mixed patchouli into the plastic mix there, and that's how they made
perfect.
Yeah.
He's working at a used record shop down by the campus even now.
Exactly. Yes.
Oh my God.
I love those. Yeah, the gimmicks were they were very creative when they were coming up with the characters back then.
Did they have one that squirted water?
Yeah, they had a couple. They had one was Snout Spout, who had an elephant head, like a mechanical elephant head, and he squirted water.
It's Ganesha.
Yeah. And then there was right. And then there was Cobra Khan, who had like a mist. He had a poisonous mist he would spray, which was great in the summer, because if it's a hot day, kids would spray Cobra Khan into their mouth, and like Banaka,
Were you ever tempted to put perfume in one and just keep it on your bureau?
That's a great idea.
It is a great idea.
Maybe I will still do that. So yeah. It was. Were you guys into that during that time? Like I said, I was a little older probably to be into it at that time, but it was still cool. I thought they were cool characters, you know.
Patrick?
Jewel, how about you? I'm the most decrepit of the three of us chronologically, so I'll pass this to you.
I was more into the cartoon than I was collecting the figures. I was not, as a kid, I was not an action figure person. Don't ask me. I was a weird kid. But I loved watching the cartoon because it was on. And it was on TBS. Then it was briefly on USA Network. And so, my mother pretty much let me watch anything, so it was nice. And yes, He-Man did have horror even in its cartoon to a degree. So I agree with you, you can have horror in He-Man. By the way, He-Man wasn't the only one. If you watch the Conan cartoon, it had some pretty horror.
Yeah.
Scary shit. The snake grabbing Conan and killing him. And I'm sitting there as a kid, I'm like, Mom, that snake just killed Conan. Yeah, watch the next episode. It's coming on.
It's amazing that they even made a Conan, because those Robert E. Howard stories are hardcore, pretty dark stuff. Yeah. Mm. Were you into this stuff at all, Patrick?
Oh, no. I had an interesting history with He-Man. It was the only toy I was forbidden to play with. And I respected the reason why. I remember when they came out, I thought these look kind of interesting. Man-at-Arms was the one who interested me most. I thought the proportions were kind of ludicrous. Everybody was built like the Intruder, which was that late G.I. Joe villain that they, with the eagle eye and Mike Power and all of that. But I remember taking my father on a constitutional around the mall, and we stopped at where KB had a big thing set up. And I said, well, what do you think of this? And he said, oh, that looks it. No, absolutely not. And I said, why? And he said, well, the name is dopey. and then he said, that's not the sort of problem solving I want modeled for you. Where it was something like that, at least, G.I. Joe was using inventions and things like that to kill each other. But just the idea of a great big brute type figure, which is sort of what it looked like, that was on the no-fly zone for that guy. And you know what? I got it. I totally respected it 100%. And so, and I was always a little confused by the mixture of technology and sword and sorcery. I couldn't really figure out if it knew what it wanted to be. And so when the cartoon came out, I watched that. I was, maybe 13, 14. And it was the sort of thing that clearly, and I know this from the writers also, wanted to be something other than what it was forced to be. That it was constantly, forced into this drink your milk and, brush your teeth kind of, didactic, educational model. Yeah. But, and yet you have a guy with a sword who never kills anyone. And it was just amazing production design. And I watched all the episodes. It was amazing production design that just crackled around the edges of going there, of really committing to something much more violent. However, therein, Danielle, I think you mentioned this, therein lies the charm, because he had to be wry. He had to be kind of innocent, and it gave, I think, an even more lovable sense of ineffectual camp to Skeletor, who's one of the great camp characters of all time. I think Langella's brilliant in the part. However, I really would have preferred Charles Nelson Riley. I'm totally honestly.
Alan Oppenheimer. Just get Alan Oppenheimer himself and put him in the Skeletor.
Yes. And I'm not quite sure why they well, I know why they didn't do it. I mean, come on. But it would have been great. Now, in the realm of camp, I love the stories Langella tells about making this. And I love how invested he was. And so I enjoyed the high linguistic drama and stakes that Skeletor was always pulling into things. And of course, it was a great time to go through puberty with Evelyn. She and the Baroness were I wish they had been my prom dates. No, I had a wonderful prom date. What am I saying? She was great. But I mean, I think even she would have preferred to have gone with the Baroness and Evelyn. And so then the movie came out, and I, just out of morbid curiosity, I had to go. And I'm greeted by this. For one thing, the words Golan Globus immediately meant that it was going to be a beautiful disaster. Of one sort or another. Life Force, one of my favorite movies. King Solomon's Mines, one of my favorite movies. And you can tell I have just atrocious tastes. But nevertheless, I love these things, and I still do to this day. And so when I saw their name, I got really excited because they had just ruined Superman just a few weeks before. And so what were they going to do to this? And it had such lovely sincerity to it. And then you got this great Bill Stout production art. Wonderful Bill Conti score. He wrote the score to The Right Stuff, which is my favorite movie from the 1980s. And Billy Barty. Oh, God, any opportunity to see Billy Barty, who, on one hand, I feel sorry for the guy having to wear this makeup because he was about 90. However, oh my gosh, what a trooper. That guy is a showman from Busby Berkeley to Grelcor and the Cosmic Key. I mean, God bless him. And he's the hardest working guy in the entire movie. And then you got Mrs. Scott Bakula running around, and Chelsea Field, and she's terrific. Courtney Cox and Robbie McNeil. And I had already been I was a big fan of Misfits of Science for, the 10 minutes it was on TV. And so I didn't know Springsteen. I was listening to the Ink Spots, but I knew my Misfits of Science, and there she was. So I was excited about that. And I thought the movie was a lot of fun. I loved it was so apparent what a low budget kind of thing it was, because, they did the Star Trek 4 move of, let's just go to someplace we don't have to do a lot of production design. It's all right there. Yes. And then James Tolkien. I want the Lubick action figure. Did they ever make a Lubick action figure?
Oh, a lot of people want one. A lot of people have asked for Lubick, and we couldn't use him in the bios because there's a rights issue, but they snuck him into one of the comics just without naming him, but it's clearly it's Lubick. But
he was doing Lubick cosplay for the past year, and I think it's really working for me. So I got a shotgun around here somewhere. So God, when Lubick gets the shotgun out, it's terrific. And
nobody shots at Lubick.
My God, Meg Foster is Evelyn.
Oh, she's amazing. She's amazing. Wow. Yeah, she's great. And she's a great.
Give her the movie.
Yeah, she was.
Give her the movie.
She's incredible. Yeah.
So I really had a great time at that film. And it was clear that the real hero of it was Gary Goddard, because even though I didn't know the story of how they basically got the plug literally pulled at the end of the film.
Yeah.
They got the plug lit, and he lit it himself with a color wheel or something, and came up with this goofy ending that works. Because it's a sincere movie. And so I love that about it. And that redeemed a lot of this for me. Yeah. Then I hadn't thought about it for years. And then Kevin Smith and that fantastic cartoon on, or I guess there's a fancier term I'm supposed to use for his cartoon, on Netflix, which, I mean, I cried at Orko's death.
Yeah.
He got such emotional resonance out of it, and I had a blast watching that. So it's been a real kind of revival for me. And now I'm done.
I love I'm glad you mentioned that, because Orko that might have been one of the reasons I was irritated at the movie, because Orko was replaced by Gwildor. And I understand in retrospect, like, they couldn't have done the effects, but as a kid, I loved Orko and Cringer and Prince Adam. I like the funny characters, and they were sweet, and I liked them a lot. And even in my teens, I still, to this day, I love Orko. And I think Lou Scheimer, when he did the voice of Orko, imbued a lot of himself, of his kind of childish spirit, into Orko. So yeah, when they did that in that new Revelation cartoon, I did actually also get kind of choked up over that a bit, even though it was a different cartoon and there was a little more edgy of cartoon, I guess, but I still got the feels when that happened with Orko. And I'm glad they kept Cringer's voice, because the 2002 cartoon didn't have Cringer talk anymore. And you gotta have Cringer talk. I feel like Cringer has to. It's a magical world, and Cringer talks to Prince Adam. So I kind of missed those characters a little bit in the movie, but I understand why they couldn't do that. As you mentioned, there was no money. They ran out of money before the end of the movie. They had to go back and shoot that last fight scene after the production got shut down.
They asked Billy Barty if he would get his legs amputated to play Orko, and he thought about it. Yeah. He's a trooper, but even Billy Barty has his limits. Yeah. So there you go.
Now, Dolph Lundgren, who plays He-Man, what were Ian's thoughts on his performance?
Well, okay, it's 1987.
Yeah,
1987, and you're making a He-Man movie. Who else are you going to get in 1987 to play He-Man? It had to be Dolph Lundgren. He just did Driving Drago and Rocky. Rocky 3 was Rocky 4 or Rocky 3?
Rocky 4.
Rocky 4. And he's not. At that time, his English was, he had a difficult time with the English language, but I think he did a pretty commendable job. Dolph Lundgren's a brilliant guy. And I love that he's since embraced that he did that movie, because for a while he kind of distanced himself from it, but now he's all in with the He-Man stuff. So I don't know. I mean, I thought he didn't have the warmth and the charm and that kind of wry sense of humor that John Irwin did in the cartoon, which I love, but he was pretty cool. I mean, I thought he was all right, little wooden, but.
When Bill Buckley had a heart attack, Sam J. Jones filled in for him when they were filming the movie. No, Sam J. Jones would have been great, but because he already had the hair. I mean, to me, he looks a lot like the action figure, but I think Sam had kind of gotten his fingers burnt. I don't know what Sam was doing, but it wasn't that. Yeah, I mean, why not Dolph Lundgren? Pardon?
I'm sorry, were you talking about Flash Gordon?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Flash,
right. Yeah.
Yeah, Sam J. Jones.
Yeah.
Of the Royal Shakespeare Company, and so Sam was Sam would have been great. I would have cast Eddie Deason, who was one of he was up there with the guy who was the mayor in Jaws in 1941 on the Ferris wheel. Is the real geeky guy with the curly hair, talk like this. Get him as He-Man. But yeah, Dolph was great. He looped his own lines. They had another actor that they brought in that I don't know who the actor was, but to loop that dialogue, and I think it's probably Lionel Stander, and they didn't use it because Menachem and Yoram insisted it's gotta be Dolph. And to Dolph's credit, Dolph re-recorded the lines, I think, 4 times. And they finally got a set of readings out of him that I thought was really good. I think that the fact that I think he's a chemical engineer, so
yeah,
he's a very bright man, and I think he had a very meticulous relationship with the language and getting it right. He's always struck me as a man of tremendous integrity. And so for me, honestly, his diction and his line readings are a lot better than I hear from many actors born in the USA or in Eternia. So, and what is an Eternian supposed to sound like? I'm sure it can sound like Dolph. Why not? So I thought he was terrific. I think he's and there's an adage in acting, which is if you're so of an actor, surround yourself with better actors and they'll make you look good. And that's what Gary Goddard did. And it's the impression I've gotten about Lundgren that he was a very eager collaborator.
Yeah, and he played very well off of John Cypher, who was Man at Arms. He was fantastic. He was great, and Chelsea Field too was a great Tila. So they all three of them together, plus Wildor, they all had really good chemistry together, and
it's a charming little ensemble.
Yeah, and they had new villains too with Skeletor. Well, they had Evelyn and Beastman. They had Meg Foster, who was awesome. I've met some of the actors from the film. Meg Foster, I've met a couple of times because I used to be involved with PowerCon back in the day, and that's a Masters of the Universe convention. And at the Rock and Shock convention, I was there as Penny Dreadful, and Meg Foster was there, so I interviewed her as Penny, and she was so sweet and just playful and fun, and I had a ball talking with Meg Foster. I met Anthony DeLongis, who played Blade in the movie, and he's an actual, he's a swordsman, and he trained Michelle Pfeiffer with the whip to play Catwoman. Wow. He's a whip master too. Like he's amazing, and so he trained Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman. So he choreographed the fight scenes in the film, and some of that. And so, and then they had new characters in there like Karg, was Robert Towers, and I guess I wondered at the time, like, why didn't they have like Triceratops? But then they made new figures for some of those characters, like Saurod, that reptilian creature, and stuff. So I thought that those designs that Bill Stout came up with, the legendary William Stout came up with really fantastic designs for those characters for sure. And there's also a Dark Shadows connections here. I got to throw out there. I mentioned in the message to you, because there are a couple of Dark Shadows connections with Masters of the Universe and Dark Shadows. One is the Sorceress was played by Christina Pickles. Seizure, yes, yep. Yeah. She co-starred with Jonathan Frid in Seizure, in Oliver Stone's first horror film. It was Christina Pickles and Jonathan Frid. And I met Christina Pickles, and stupidly I didn't ask her. I was so busy, and I didn't ask her about Jonathan. But I'm glad in Mary O'Leary's Jonathan Frid documentary, she's in there, so and talks about Jonathan. And then the other connection is actually from the cartoon series. George DiCenzo, the associate producer of Dark Shadows, went on to become an actor, and he was the voice of the villainous Hordak in the She-Ra cartoon. She-Ra's archenemy Hordak was by George DiCenzo. And when I first noticed that, I was into Dark Shadows before I was into Masters of the Universe and horror, like monsters and stuff like that. And I knew George DiCenzo's name, and at some point I noticed that name in the credits, and I said, "That's the name from Dark Shadows." And eventually I found out it was the same guy. Like George DiCenzo went on to be the voice of Hordak.
Yeah. Actually, see, Dolph Lundgren was in a Bond movie. Well, he's in the background of a Bond movie.
Oh, is he?
Yeah, A View to a Kill. He was dating Grace Jones at the time.
Oh.
So.
Wow, I can imagine that combination, those two together. Wow.
But you have to catch it. Like it's.
Yeah.
So he's in the movie, but his English gets. His English gets a little better in Dark Angel, I Come in Peace. I think by that time that movie come out, his English was a lot better. He had a little more lines. I love the movie he's in with Brandon Lee.
what was Cubby Broccoli thinking? Seriously, what on earth? I mean, Roger Moore. Let's pit him against maybe Esther Roll and Vic Tayback, instead of Dolph Lundgren and Grace Jones. That's more of a. I mean, but just the idea of Roger Moore going up against either one of them is ludicrous and wonderful. That's what I love about the Bond movies. And I giggle at the thought.
Oh my gosh. Is there anything you both want to add for He-Man Masters of the Universe?
I don't know. Frank Langella for the movie. I mean, Frank Langella and Meg Foster, if for no other reason, if you have no interest in any of that stuff, I would say at least for those two performances, I mean, they're really excellent. I know there were some limitations with those prosthetics that Langella had, but it still comes through. He's a great actor. Frank Langella is amazing. So yeah.
Jewel, I have to ask you, as these recordings have gone on, you are the baby face, I am the heel. And so I got to ask you a question. Tell me, Jewel, about the loneliness of good. And does it compare in any way to the loneliness of evil? That's all I got to say.
Nice.
Listen. You want to? I'll give you a quick wrestling story before we go.
Show is complete.
Okay. Do you know who Marty Lundy is?
Yes.
Marty Lundy is the guy who played the character Arn Anderson in wrestling. His real name isn't Anderson. Now, he was given the name Anderson by a man named Ole Anderson, whose real name is Ole Anderson. And the reason that is because Marty Lundy looked enough like an Anderson to be an Anderson. See, so Ole let him use his family's last name. And besides, Ole was a member of the Four Horsemen. Now, it wasn't Ole Anderson who named the Four Horsemen the Four Horsemen. It was Arn Anderson, Marty Lundy, in an interview with Tony Schiavone, and Arn Anderson's cutting a promo saying, "You mess with the Horsemen again, Rhodes, and you're going to get hurt." And the interview cut, and Tony Schiavone said, "You just named yourselves." He said, "No, I didn't." He said, "Yes, you did. You just said the Horsemen." And that's how the Four Horsemen became the Four Horsemen.
I always wondered. So
that's my wrestling story before we go.
I don't know Ole Anderson. I do know Oleana, directed by and written by David Mamet, who would have done an interesting job with this. If you had Bill Macy as He-Man. That's all I got.
There's one actor you forgot to mention in the movie. Charlie, the music store guy, was played by Barry Livingston, who was Ernie in My Three Sons. There you go. Blink and you miss it.
Okay, J.J. Dillon, Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, and J.J. Dillon. Those are the 5 original members of the Four Horsemen.
So why are there 5 if there are 4?
One's a manager.
One's got to be the horse.
J.J. Dillon was their manager. Not now, when you hear them cut a promo, not that they needed a speaker, but still.
What do you think about this? A storyline in Dark Shadows where The Undertaker and Paul Bearer show up in Collinsport, write the fanfic, do it now. Jewel?
Well, here's the thing. I don't know if you heard the video, one video did. I said for the werewolf, his theme music should be the Ultimate Warrior's theme music, because the werewolf would show up, he would destroy things and leave, and that's what the warrior would do.
Well, I'm surprised one of you guys hasn't done that yet and taken the video and put the music. And there you go.
I did the Captain Kirk fight theme with Jeb and Quentin fighting. You can find that on YouTube.
That's I gotta look at that. That's perfect.
Link to Penny Dreadful's channel And by the way, go vote for her in the Rondo Awards. And link to the Dark Shadows Daybook where you get it on Amazon will be in the description box. First of all, thank you both for your time, and I always appreciate you. Thank you both.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Take care. Good night.
Bye. Good night.